Today we are going to be installing the RNC Legend cranks onto my bike. I'm sorry for the delay on this. The holidays, getting sick, whatever, no excuses. We're here now, we're putting them on my bike. These cranks, if you haven't seen them before, are the cranks from RNC BMX that are made of Maraging Steel, which is supposed to be like one of the strongest, if not the strongest metal on the planet. It is a grade of steel that makes it so that these cranks can be unbelievably light while retaining insane amounts of strength. So both of the arms look like this, and these are 170 millimeters. They are indeed tubular and welded, and if you want all of the information about them, you can watch the unboxing video where I give all of the information about them. But I'll give you the one key factor here in that this whole entire crank set, with between both arms, spindle, and the bolts, weighs in around 14 ounces, which is 6 ounces lighter than the previous set, the one I have on my bike, or the titanium ones that were already made, and like ridiculous amounts lighter than the next lightest crank set in BMX. And then normal cranks, look out, these are crazy light. So we're gonna be installing these today, and I figured before we actually install them, we should probably weigh my bike and see what it weighs in at, just to get a baseline and then know, how much weight we're losing on there. So with that, let's go ahead and put it on the scale. Shout out to Park Tool with the Park Tool scale. Wow. So it comes in at 27 even? Somehow that feels off. All right, so 27 was correct. We put it on the seat and it weighs about the same. So the bike weighs in 26, 15, 27 pounds. So now we can get rid of the scale. Once again, shout out to Park Tool. But we're gonna go ahead and throw the bike onto the stand and grab a new angle to take off the old cranks and put on the new ones. And I figure there's probably no reason to go ahead and do all of the taking off of my old cranks in real time. So we'll just go ahead and time lapse through this. I'm just going to be taking off my pedals so I can put them back on, and the cranks, as well as take the spindle and everything out, because the spindle that comes with these is a little bit shorter because the width of the cranks that go on the spindle on these new ones is actually thinner, meaning that if we used this spindle, even though it's the exact same 80 tooth spindle, we would have a lot more spacers that we would have to put in. So let's just go ahead and time lapse through removing these old cranks. One tip I'll give too while we're doing this is that you definitely want to break your pedals loose before you go ahead and take the cranks off themselves, because it's just way easier to break pedals loose when they're on the bike and the cranks are on the bike. Whoa. Okay, so I probably should at least show that part. I have not taken these off at all since I put them on, and they just came off very easily. And I guess, maybe this is a good opportunity to talk about these aluminum cranks from RNC. Aside from just having to make sure that my pedals were tight all the time to make sure that I didn't ride loose pedals and ruin these threads, I had nothing bad to say. I mean, that isn't even really a bad thing in general either. I thoroughly enjoyed having these cranks, had no problems with them, so nothing bad to report here. Just if you get them, make sure you keep your pedals tight all the time, and that's just a preventative maintenance type thing so that you keep yourself from having problems in the future. So yeah, very easy here. This process has gone nice and smoothly, and because of the removal tool that's included here, I can much more easily get this spindle out of my frame maybe we grab, you know, the hammer since we have one. And just like that, took a couple hits on the cranks themselves, but that's to be expected, you know, once you get the removal tool into your bearing, how you gonna do it, you know? Which I just remembered about my situation with my spacer. I really hope we can easily get the other spindle in there. And now we're to the part of the install that could have been a huge pain in the neck installing wise, but I'm going to show you how to make it not a huge pain in the neck, and that is putting in the new spindle if your bottom bracket spacer situation requires more than just the one wide spacer. You would need this, for example, if the spacer that you have for your bottom bracket isn't wide enough for your bottom bracket tube. That means you'd have to put extra spacers in there to compensate for the width. And when you take your old spindle out, that means these are floating. These can get moved independently of each other, and you're trying to fish things through here. It can be a huge pain in the neck to try and line everything up. But my buddy Jeff Mead showed me an easier way. So what we do is we put our spacers onto our spindle. We put our other bottom bracket bearing onto it as well. And then we simply slide that into the other side. And some of these can be a little bit tight and a bit of a pain to line up, but there it is. And now our bearing lines up perfectly with our frame, so that all we gotta do is grab the Polylube, Park Tool Polylube 1000, get some onto the bearing here, slide it out a little bit, get some into the cup, which it already had a bearing in there, so it's completely coated in grease already, but never hurts to add more. We can grab our removal tool, which is about to become our install tool for our bottom bracket and our spindle, and then we can hit that, making sure that our bearing, you know, stays on the spindle in this process, because it can come off very easily. And now that we have the spindle hammered through to where it's in the bearing but not all the way through the bearing, we can go ahead and hit our bottom bracket bearing in, all the way around it. Now we get to the spindle itself again, so we're gonna hit that through a little bit more just so we don't damage the spindle. But this makes it so that our spacer, our spindle, everything perfectly centered, and this is a it requires a little bit of hammering, but this is a fantastic way to install a bottom bracket if you have no other tools available to you. If you can get your old one out, or at least one of the old bearings out, then you can put in the new bearing, then pound out the old bearing, then put the next new bearing in the exact same method, and it's way, way easier. So now our spindle is in here and it's centered, everything's lined up the way that it should be, and it makes this whole process much, much easier. So at this point, I'm gonna go ahead and grab the spacing that we're going to need for between sprocket and the bearing. Grab my sprocket. But before we put it on there, I'm gonna do a little bit of cleanup and grab the Polylube again and make sure that we lubricate the spindle really well in the process too. get it all lubricated as good as we can, because these spindles are titanium, so you could and probably should use tie prep on it as well. So I'm lubricating as much as I can to make it so that we don't have any cold welding issues or anything like that, and excess grease can always be wiped off, putting grease inside as well. Easy enough. And then after I get this sprocket cleaned up, we'll be able to throw it on there. And you know, I've been riding this old Madeira sprocket that I had laying around because the adapter for this spindle, the 80 spline adapter that RNC is making, fits this sprocket. But I also sent a alienation sprocket for this adapter to be machined out of. So I'll be able to put one of these adapters into the alienation sprocket and run an alienation sprocket with this setup, which is pretty cool. So now, boom, sprocket installed. Super, super easy. Let's go ahead and grab our cranks. Right side drive. Am I putting this on the left side? I am definitely putting this on the left side. Be smarter than that. You're smarter than that. I'm smarter than that. We're smarter than that. We caught it this time though. So, you actually need left side crank arm. And I'm gonna go ahead and put a bunch of grease inside the splines on the crank arm, poly-lubing it up. And then now we can install this one. So this one doesn't matter where we put it on the splines because of the fact that it's going on the non-drive side. So I'm trying to get it lined up here, get it onto the spindle. I got it most of the way on there by hand, and it almost starts. Barely tapping, it works. Camera may have moved a little bit, sorry about that, but now we just tighten this up, snug it up, and then we may end up having to tighten it a bit more once we get the other side situated, but I won't know that until we get that other side situated. So let's go ahead and flip the bike around and then get the sprocket and everything else on. All right, so now we go ahead and throw the spacing that I know that we need on the inside, at the very least, to get our sprocket to work on this spindle with this frame. Got to make sure you get the sprocket far enough away from the chain stays. You don't want the sprocket rubbing. And we get this side lubricated nice. And then we go ahead and we can put the sprocket and then the other crank arm on. So, got that handled. Now, grab the sprocket. I'm going to try to line this up in a way that I can put the other one on and everything works. There we go. Looks good. And now grab the other crank arm. Now this would be the right side. Poly-lube inside the crank arm as well. Basically just making sure that I cover all of my bases when it comes to grease and these cranks. I don't want to experience any unnecessary issues, which is what you should do too if you're going to buy $1,000 cranks. And I guess at this point, this would be the perfect and first opportunity to tell you guys that if you use the code Brant whenever you buy from RNC, you save 10% and help me out at the same time. And I'm gonna try the same spacing that I had before, even though I don't know if I need it or not. We're just gonna go ahead and see. I think I'll be able to get it apart easy enough. If not, yeah, that comes apart and goes together very nicely. So it's pretty good there. Yeah, actually that looks awesome. So if we're lined up square, with that, I can grab the other bolt, the tool, because these do come with a tool that you use for this, or you can use a 12mm Allen wrench. But we get that tightened down. I'm gonna loosen it just a little bit, and then we're gonna pull the other side through. Just wanna make sure when you're doing this that your spindle is centered in your cranks as much as you can, so that you have an equal amount of spindle in each side of your crank. And there we go. So I'll do the fine tuning later. The spacing looks great. We have about 1/4 inch on each side. Looks good to me. I totally forgot to put my chain back on, but that's fine. We can put the chain back on later. Grease more than you think you need to. But I would rather clean up excess grease to prevent problems in the future than encounter those problems. Now, pedals, when our bike is right side up, tighten towards the front, both sides. All right, so there's one side done. Now let's grab the poly lube. Had to grab a smaller set of Allens here to work with my chain because I totally forgot to put my chain back on with my sprocket the way that I took it off all at the same time, so that I wouldn't have to move my wheel or anything like that. Now I have to break my chain, but luckily I have the Odyssey keychain, which means all I need is a 4mm Allen to take out the master pin, and then we can take the chain apart that easily, making sure it's on the driver. It has this cool little lip on it, I guess is what I would call it, that kind of holds itself together there, as you can see, so that it's on the sprocket, everything's installed, and then all I have to do is grab my master pin again and retighten it down, and boom, just like that, we have it installed. All right, here we go. Let's see how much lighter my bike is now. Should, in theory, just be 6 ounces lighter, so 2610? 2610 or less. Let's see what it says. There it is, 26.9. So that is it. The RNC Legend cranks are now on my bike. I will be riding these and giving my thoughts on them through the process, give a final review. As of right now, they are 14-ounce cranks. They cost $1,000. You can save 10% off of these or anything else from RNC by using the code Brant when you check out, and that helps me at the same time. But with all of that, that's the install process. If you already had RNC 24mm cranks, it's a very easy process. If you didn't already, well then you're gonna have to get the bottom bracket that fits these, because it is a different size than what BMX calls 24mm, and that means it is a proprietary bottom bracket that you will have to get with them. Same with the sprocket situation. You can get the profile adapter or use an RNC sprocket, but if you didn't have any of that before, then the process really is no different than installing cranks with a bottom bracket. Any other set of cranks that are out there, because you put the bottom bracket in, you put the spindle in, you put your cranks on, you put your pedals on, you put your sprocket on, and you're good to go. So I'm excited to go ride these tomorrow. I hope you've enjoyed this video and this process. If you have any questions, hit me up on Instagram. Thank you, RNC. I'm excited to give thoughts on these, and we'll see you tomorrow for another video. Goodbye.